In 1951, a flying saucer landed in Washington, D.C. and offered humanity peace. We shot at it. In 1956, aliens came just to repair their ship and go home. We hunted them. For an entire decade, science fiction tried to tell us something. The monsters aren't coming from space. They're already here. These 13 films understood what we still refuse to accept. And it might be too late to listen. From flying saucers over Washington to giant ants beneath Los Angeles, from shrinking men to imperiled planets, each one asked a question we're still struggling to answer. By the time we reach the final film, you'll understand why the 1950s was the most prophetic decade in cinema history, and why we ignored the one warning that mattered most. The messenger who came in peace. I am fearful when I see people substituting fear for reason. When Klaatu spoke these words, he wasn't describing his own fear. He was describing ours, the fear that would define a generation, and the one we still haven't conquered. It begins with silence. A flying saucer gliding over Washington, landing on the lawn of humanity's most powerful government. But what emerges isn't conquest. It's a warning that would echo through 7 decades of cinema. The Day the Earth Stood Still arrived in theaters in 1951, emerging from the shadow of Hiroshima and into the chill of the early Cold War. Director Robert Wise understood something profound about the moment. The world was terrified of the atomic bomb, of communism, of the future itself. Instead of feeding that fear, he chose to challenge it. The film opens with a spacecraft descending upon the nation's capital, and from it emerges Klaatu, an extraterrestrial envoy, played with remarkable calm by Michael Rennie. He doesn't arrive with weapons drawn or threats bellowed. He arrives with concern. His message is simple but devastating. Earth's growing arsenal of atomic power threatens the peace of the cosmos. Accompanying him is Gort, a towering robot of sleek, silent power, capable of leveling entire cities. But Gort doesn't attack. He watches. He waits. He becomes the embodiment of consequence itself. What made this film revolutionary wasn't its special effects or spectacle. It was its tone. It didn't preach. It didn't shout. It asked a question that still lingers today. What would happen if we were confronted by a civilization more advanced and more moral than our own? Would we listen, or would we react in fear? Patricia Neal, luminous and grounded, anchors the story as Helen Benson, a war widow who becomes Klaatu's unlikely ally. Her performance reminds us that understanding begins not with governments or armies, but with individuals willing to see beyond their own borders. Bernard Herrmann's haunting theremin score weaves through every scene, creating an atmosphere both otherworldly and deeply human. Unlike the monster movies that dominated the era, The Day the Earth Stood Still moved with quiet urgency. Klaatu's ultimatum carries no malice, it carries responsibility. Join us and live in peace, he tells the people of Earth, or pursue your present course and face obliteration. The film concludes without tidy resolution, leaving humanity and the audience with a decision still hanging in the air. More than 70 years later, the flying saucer may appear dated and the effects modest by today's standards. But the idea remains timeless. In a world still grappling with nuclear tensions, artificial intelligence, and fracturing global unity, Klaatu's warning feels less like science fiction and more like prophecy. We witness the same pattern Klaatu warned against, playing out in real time. The most alien thing we may ever face is our own stubborn refusal to change. And as the saucer lifts silently back into the stars, one question remains. Will we finally listen? One film thought we wouldn't, and showed us exactly what lives in the darkness of our own minds when we refuse to evolve. Shakespeare, Among the Stars. My evil self is at that door, and I have no power to stop it. When Dr. Morbius spoke these words, he wasn't talking about an alien invader. He was talking about the one thing science fiction's spent the entire decade warning us about, and we still haven't learned to control. There are science fiction films that reflect their time, and then there are those that seem to leap far beyond it. Forbidden Planet did both, becoming the film that gave birth to the modern space epic and asked a question we're still afraid to answer. Released in 1956, Forbidden Planet took the genre into uncharted territory, becoming one of the first science fiction films to truly blend intellectual ambition with visual grandeur. Set on the distant planet Altair 4, the story follows a crew of space explorers who arrive to investigate the fate of a lost colony. What they find isn't ruins, but an isolated paradise ruled by Dr. Morbius and his daughter Altara, the sole survivors of the original expedition. Walter Pidgeon brings both gravitas and barely concealed madness to Morbius, a man intoxicated by the knowledge he's discovered from an extinct alien race called the Krell. And Francis is Altera, embodying innocence raised in complete isolation from human society. Leslie Nielsen commands the screen with absolute seriousness as Commander Adams, the pragmatic military officer who must unravel a deadly mystery before it consumes them all. The plot echoes The Tempest, with Morbius as a kind of Prospero figure, isolated and drunk on power. Instead of magic, he wields a mind-amplifying machine left behind by the Krell. What begins as a rescue mission becomes a psychological horror story when the crew realizes they're being hunted by an invisible force. The revelation is chilling. The creature isn't some alien predator. It's the projection of Morbius's own repressed darkness, given terrible form by technology he cannot control. The greatest threat, the film whispers, lies not in the stars, but within us. Technically, the film was years ahead of its time. It was the first science fiction film shot in CinemaScope, filling the screen with vast alien landscapes and elaborate sets. The score, composed entirely electronically by Louis and B.B. Barron, created soundscapes that were haunting, beautiful, and utterly unlike anything audiences had heard before. And then there was Robbie the Robot, whose design was so influential that it launched an entire legacy of robot cinema and television. Without Forbidden Planet, there would be no Star Trek, no 2001, A Space Odyssey, no Alien. But beyond its legacy is a deeper question the film still asks. What happens when our intelligence outpaces our emotional maturity? When we gain the power to reshape worlds, but lack the wisdom to reshape ourselves? In the end, Morbius cannot face what his mind has unleashed. Altair 4 is consumed by fire, and the crew, having witnessed the price of power without wisdom, sails silently back to Earth. The stars remain unchanged, but the audience doesn't. And as we'll discover, the fear of the unknown often pale beside the fear of recognizing ourselves in the darkness. Which brings us to a film that understood our deepest terror. What if the enemy isn't out there at all? What if it's already here, wearing a familiar face? The enemy, next door. There's no emotion, none, just the pretense of it. Have you ever looked at someone you love and felt like they're not really there anymore? In 1956, a film understood that terror better than anything made sense. Sometimes the scariest science fiction doesn't come from space. It comes from inside your own town, your own home, your own mind. Invasion of the Body Snatchers arrived in theaters in 1956, and it remains one of the most enduring films of the decade because it turns the ordinary into the unthinkable. The story unfolds in the small California town of Santa Mira, where Dr. Miles Bennell begins to notice something deeply troubling. Friends and neighbors insist that their loved ones aren't the same. They look identical, speak the same words, But the light behind their eyes has vanished. The horrifying truth emerges. Humanity is being quietly replaced by emotionless replicas grown from alien pods while they sleep. Kevin McCarthy delivers one of the most iconic performances in science fiction history as Dr. Bennell. Dana Winter brings warmth and intelligence to Becky Driscoll, the woman caught beside him in this waking nightmare. With no laser guns, no robots, and no distant galaxies, this film builds dread in the most familiar settings imaginable. Director Don Siegel, working on a modest budget, created a masterclass in atmospheric tension. He uses shadow, extreme close-ups, and silence to suffocating effect. There's no musical score manipulating the audience's emotions, just long, quiet moments of doubt, punctuated by sudden, breathless panic. The terror comes not from what you see, but from what you begin to suspect about the person sitting across from you at the breakfast table. The film has been interpreted in countless ways over the decades, as a Cold War parable, a warning against conformity, or a critique of McCarthy-era paranoia. But what gives it lasting power is its universal fear, losing what makes us human. The capacity to feel, to love, to care, all of it drained away and replaced by something that merely imitates life. The film's final moments are among the most unforgettable in cinema. McCarthy, wild-eyed and breathless, standing in traffic and screaming his desperate warning. "They're here already! You're next." The camera doesn't offer rescue or resolution. It simply stares back at us. Body Snatchers didn't predict pods. It predicted this: the slow replacement of feeling with performance, of genuine connection with empty imitation. Invasion of the Body Snatchers hasn't aged. It's only become more real. And as we'll see, the 1950s understood something profound. Sometimes, the most terrifying invasion begins not with a spaceship, but with silence. Before we continue, a quick question. Which of these films terrified your parents? Drop a comment. I'm reading all of them. We're 3 films deep now, and you might be noticing something. Each one showed us threats from outside, aliens, invaders, the other. But the 1950s understood something darker. Sometimes the enemy isn't from distant stars. The next 4 films would explore our greatest fear, that the real monster might be us, or what we become when we stop paying attention to the consequences of our choices. Frozen Fear Awakens. Watch the skies everywhere. Keep looking, keep watching the skies. In 2023, scientists drilling in the Arctic discovered organic matter preserved in ice for thousands of years. But in 1951, a film had already imagined what happens next. The thing from another world understood a truth we're only now beginning to face. The ice is melting, and we have no idea what we've kept frozen all this time. That warning arrived 70 years too early. We weren't listening then. We're barely listening now. Buried beneath Arctic ice, something waits, silent, forgotten, and then it wakes. What followed wasn't just a milestone in science fiction. It was a turning point in cinematic suspense. The film arrived the same year that brought us The Day the Earth Stood Still. But where that film offered hope for peaceful contact, this one asked a question with no comfortable answer. What if the visitor has no interest in understanding us at all? What if communication isn't even possible? Produced by the legendary Howard Hawks and directed by Christian Nyby, the film brought the alien invasion story dangerously close to Earth. Not with grand cities destroyed or galactic warfare, but with a handful of men and women trapped in an isolated Arctic research station, fighting something they barely comprehend and cannot reason with. The plot begins with a mysterious crash in the Arctic Circle. A United States Air Force crew is dispatched to investigate, along with a group of scientists. What they uncover is a spacecraft buried deep in ice, and inside it, a humanoid figure frozen solid. Kenneth Tobey commands the screen as Captain Patrick Hendry. Robert Cornthwaite is compelling as Dr. Carrington, the scientist whose curiosity may doom them all. And James Arness is the creature itself, more plant than animal, an organism that feeds on blood. But the real terror doesn't come from the creature's appearance. It comes from what the film doesn't show. Shadows flickering in corridors, footsteps crunching in fresh snow. This is horror built through the atmosphere. Fear constructed frame by careful frame. Hawks understood that what lurks just beyond our vision is far more frightening than anything fully revealed. What elevated the film beyond simple monster fare was its moral complexity. At the center of it all was a philosophical divide that felt startlingly contemporary. Do we try to communicate with the alien? Or do we vanquish it before it vanquishes us? Is it curiosity versus fear? Or reason versus instinct? And here's the disturbing part. The film never tells us who was right. Made during the early years of the Cold War, the film reflects a nation uncertain how to face a world suddenly full of new and incomprehensible dangers. More than 70 years later, the film's final warning still echoes with chilling relevance. Watch the skies, not just for what's coming from beyond, but for what we may no longer be able to understand when it finally arrives. And sometimes, as we'll discover, the monsters we fear most aren't the ones from space. They're the ones we create in our own laboratories, with the best intentions and the worst outcomes. The tragedy of tomorrow. I'm still me. Let me tell you about a tragedy that begins with scientific triumph and ends with a voice barely louder than a whisper, crying out words that will haunt you. Help me. This is the case of André Delambre, brilliant physicist, devoted husband, loving father, and the man who made one small mistake that cost him everything. The evidence a scientist found expired in his own laboratory, his face and arm destroyed in a hydraulic press. His wife, Helene, confesses immediately, with haunting calm. Just one question that defies every attempt at understanding. Why? The fly unfolds not as an invasion or a battle for Earth, but as something far more intimate and devastating. The slow, horrific unraveling of a man who crossed a boundary science wasn't ready for. Released in 1958 and directed by Kurt Newman, the film took a premise that could have been pure pulp and transformed it into Greek tragedy. Here's what we know happened. André Delambre was obsessed with matter transportation, teleportation. Experiments seemed harmless at first. Keys, coffee cups, eventually living creatures. All successful. But what André didn't know is that matter transportation requires absolute isolation. One foreign object in the chamber, and the molecular patterns would merge. When he transported himself, a common housefly entered the apparatus with him. David Hedison brings heartbreaking vulnerability to André, a man whose genius becomes his curse in ways he can comprehend but cannot prevent. Patricia Owens, luminous and shattered, as Helene, carries the film's emotional weight, watching helplessly as the man she loves dissolves into something unrecognizable. And Vincent Price, in a performance far quieter and more restrained than audiences expected from him, plays the brother-in-law, Philippe. What emerged from that chamber wasn't a grotesque creature immediately. It was still André. But something was profoundly wrong. At first, he hides his face beneath a cloth, communicates with Helene only through desperate, scrawled notes. His handwriting begins to deteriorate. His requests become stranger. Then his behavior begins to change. So does his mind, not into madness, but into something more terrible. Awareness. He knows exactly what's happening to him. He understands that he's losing himself piece by piece. First his appearance, then his thoughts, and eventually his humanity itself. And the knowledge terrifies him beyond words. And here's what makes this film devastating. There are no alien invasions here. No military confrontations. No villain to blame. Just a husband, a father, and a man who believed too deeply in the promise of progress and paid an unthinkable price for one moment of inattention. The film is built not on spectacle, but on sorrow. The special effects may appear dated now, but the fear of mutation, of loss, or helplessness still resonates with devastating clarity. What makes The Fly endure isn't just the famous final scene, the tiny hybrid creature trapped in a spider's web, crying out, "Help me," in a voice barely human. It's the sadness that leads up to it, the slow realization that love cannot fix this, that cannot undo what science has done, that some doors, once open, cannot be closed again. The film asks not whether science has gone too far, but something more subtle and more haunting. What if science doesn't wait for our souls to catch up? What if progress moves faster than wisdom? And by the time we realize the cost, it's already too late? Even today, as technology accelerates faster than ethics can follow, The Fly stands as a tragic parable, a reminder that the line between man and monster isn't always where we imagine it to be. And sometimes, the greatest horrors come not from the stars, but from our own laboratories and our own ambitions. Yet even as progress marches forward, some began to wonder, what if someone else, somewhere else in the universe, was making the exact same mistakes? A plea from a dying world. The universe is vast, but perhaps the greatest distance is between two minds that can't understand each other. Two films about alien contact arrived in the 1950s. Most showed invasion. This island Earth showed us something we weren't ready for. Aliens who needed us. Aliens who were just as frightened, just as desperate, just as flawed as we were. It starts with a test we don't know we're taking. A strange package arrives containing electronic parts that don't belong to any known system. An invitation wrapped in mystery. And suddenly, a brilliant physicist is looking through a screen into another world. This island Earth arrived in 1955 with a premise unlike anything audiences had seen before. This wasn't a story of conquest or invasion. It was a story of recruitment, of deception, dressed up as collaboration, and ultimately of watching a civilization make the same mistakes we were making. Rex Reason brings earnest intelligence to Dr. Cal Meacham, the nuclear scientist who finds himself chosen for something he cannot yet comprehend. Jeff Morrow delivers the most complex performance as Exeter, the alien whose gentle demeanor, careful words, and obvious intelligence can't quite hide the terrible secret weighing on him. When Cal assembles the mysterious components, he's suddenly communicating through an interocitor, a device that allows him to see into another realm. The invitation has been sent. The test has begun. Cal is brought to a remote facility where select scientists gather under circumstances that grow stranger by the hour. Their host, Exeter, is clearly not of this world. He speaks of advanced knowledge. But as the truth slowly reveals itself, the scientists realize they haven't been invited to collaborate. They've been conscripted. Exeter's planet, Metaluna, is perishing under relentless atomic bombardment from an enemy we never see, and Earth's greatest minds are being gathered to save a civilization they never knew existed. The film set itself apart with bold visual imagination, shot in glorious Technicolor with surreal laboratory sets bathed in unnatural glows. It brought a sense of spectacle and wonder to a genre still finding its aesthetic voice. The Metaluna mutant, though appearing only briefly in the film's final act, became one of science fiction's most recognizable creatures. But the film's real impact lies not in its monsters, but in its morality. Exeter is not a villain. He's desperate, civilized, cultured, and trapped by the chaos of interstellar conflict. When Metaluna begins to collapse under atomic assault, his final words carry a sadness that lingers far beyond the closing credits. He knows his people are doomed, He knows he failed. And he knows that Earth is making exactly the same mistakes Metaluna made 1,000 years ago. The film asks a question still relevant today. Can intelligence survive without empathy? Can any civilization endure if it sacrifices others for its own survival? Can technology save us if we haven't learned wisdom? This island, Earth, doesn't scream its warnings. It wonders aloud, with restraint and melancholy. And sometimes, as we learned in that decade of dreams and anxiety, wondering leaves the longest echo. But not every visitor from the stars came seeking help or offering warnings. The day the cities burned, the Martians had no resistance to the bacteria in our atmosphere. By the toll of 1 billion individuals lost, man had earned his immunity. Her name was Sylvia Van Buren. She was a teacher. And in 1 week, she watched the world end 3 times. This is the story of how War of the Worlds made the apocalypse personal. It begins with a flash in the sky, a meteor streaking toward Earth in a blaze of fire. People gather to see where it lands. Unaware, it carries not wonder, but war. What followed was the first time audiences truly understood what the world's end might look like. War of the Worlds arrived in 1953, bringing H.G. Wells's iconic novel to vivid, terrifying life. Directed by Byron Haskin and produced by the visionary George Powell, this was the first major adaptation of Wells's story. Released during the height of Cold War anxiety, the film tapped directly into the nuclear dread that haunted the decade. Gene Barry brings gravitas and determination to Dr. Clayton Forrester, the scientist who witnesses the invasion firsthand. But it's Anne Robinson, as Sylvia Van Buren, who carries the film's emotional truth, luminous, resilient, and increasingly terrified as everything she believed about humanity's place in the universe crumbles around her. The plot unfolds with stark immediacy. Martians arrive on Earth and begin a methodical, unstoppable conquest. Cities crumble in minutes. Governments collapse within hours. Humanity scrambles desperately for survival, and nothing works. Not the army, not the Air Force, not even an atomic bomb. There is no negotiation with the Martians, no communication, no mercy, just towering manta, ray-shaped war machines, gliding across the landscape. Their heat rays reducing everything in their path to ash and silence. The film's visual impact was both revolutionary and haunting. The sound of the Martian heat ray, a pyrrhon, rising hum that seems to tear through the very air, remains one of cinema's most chilling audio effects. But beyond the spectacle was something deeper and more unsettling. This wasn't simply about Martians. It was about the fear of being unprepared, of being utterly powerless in the face of overwhelming force. The film offered no heroic last stand, no brilliant scientist, no plan that saves the day. In the end, it wasn't human ingenuity or military might that stopped the invasion. It was nature itself, bacteria, the smallest things, invisible and overlooked, became Earth's salvation. The Martians, with all their technology, had no immunity to Earth's microorganisms. They conquered the planet, then perished where they stood. That ending, lifted directly from Wells's original novel, remains one of the most humbling in all of science fiction. It reminds us that we are not masters of the universe. War of the Worlds understood terror not as noise or spectacle, but as helplessness. The crushing realization that all our weapons might mean nothing when confronted by forces beyond our understanding. More than 70 years later, the film still holds remarkable power. And yet, as audiences would soon discover, sometimes the greatest threats don't come from vast distances or alien worlds. Sometimes they come from within ourselves, growing smaller and stranger. With each passing moment, we've seen threats from outside, aliens, invasions, the apocalypse itself. But what these next films understood was something more unsettling. The ultimate terror isn't extinction, it's transformation. It's losing ourselves piece by piece. The final 6 films of this journey would ask the hardest questions, smaller than infinity. To God, there is no zero. I still exist. These 6 words contain the most profound philosophical statement in all of science fiction. They were spoken by a man who had shrunk smaller than atoms. Science fiction often looks outward, to space, to time, to distant futures. But in 1957, one film turned inward. The Incredible Shrinking Man, directed by Jack Arnold, and based on Richard Matheson's haunting novel, is perhaps the most poetic film science fiction produced in the 1950s. After being exposed to a mysterious radioactive mist, an ordinary man, Scott Carey, begins to shrink, slowly, inexorably, unstoppably, till the world around him transforms into a monstrous battleground of everyday objects. Grant Williams delivers a performance of growing desperation and unexpected grace as Scott Carey. Randy Stewart brings warmth and heartbreak to Louise, his wife. Scott isn't saving Earth. He's trying to survive in his own house. A simple thread spool becomes a shelter. The family cat becomes a prowling predator. And a common cellar spider transforms into a creature of nightmare proportions. As Scott shrinks, so does everything he once took for granted. His marriage begins to falter. His masculinity, his pride, his very sense of self, all of it diminishes alongside his body. He becomes, in the cruelest way imaginable, invisible even while still present. The final 15 minutes take a turn that transforms it from horror into something approaching spiritual revelation. But first, Scott has to face the spider. Arnold directs with surprising restraint and profound artistry. Using practical effects and oversized sets, he builds an immersive, unsettling perspective that places the audience directly inside Scott's shrinking world. A basement becomes a vast wilderness. But it's the final 10 minutes that truly elevate this film into something transcendent and unforgettable. Alone, having shrunk beyond visibility, Scott enters the subatomic realm, and instead of despairing, he finds meaning in a voiceover that stands as one of the most quietly profound monologues in all of science fiction. He realizes that smaller doesn't mean less, that invisibility doesn't mean non-existence, that the universe contains infinite space in both directions, outward toward galaxies, inward toward atoms, and he is part of all of it. There are no explosions here, no aliens, just a man facing the infinite void and refusing to cease to be. Just a voice saying, "I still exist. To God, there is no zero." The Incredible Shrinking Man still resonates because its terror is deeply personal. We all fear losing control, but the film dares to answer that fear, not with horror, but with grace and unexpected wonder. It suggests that meaning doesn't require size. And as we'll discover, the 1950s understood that survival sometimes means facing not just the end of the world, but the question of whether we deserve to continue at all. This countdown to extinction. The Earth doomed. But some may live to start again. There's a specific kind of fear that can't be outrun. The fear of inevitability. When astronomers discovered that Earth's days were numbered, humanity faced its most primal question: who deserves to survive? And who gets to decide? When Worlds Collide arrived in theaters in 1951 with news that felt less like science fiction and more like prophecy. Produced by George Powell, the film opened with a message from the stars that no government wanted to hear. Astronomers discover a rogue star, Belus, hurtling directly toward Earth. Beside it orbits a smaller planet, Zyra, which might be habitable. The time before impact, mere months. A desperate plan is set in motion. Build a rocket ship capable of carrying a chosen few, to safety before Earth is consumed entirely. What makes when worlds collide so striking, even now, is that it dwells on consequence. Who gets to survive? Who makes that decision? The film doesn't answer them cleanly. Richard Durr is the pilot chosen to fly the ship. John Hoyt delivers a complex performance as the wheelchair-bound financier who funds the entire project, knowing with absolute certainty that he'll never board the vessel himself. PAL's production earned an Academy Award for its visual effects, the rocket's launch, the collapse of cities as the world begins to tear itself apart. All of it was realized with meticulous craft and genuine awe, but the film's most enduring moments are quieter than any disaster sequence. The drawing of lots to determine who boards the ship, the final farewells between those chosen and those left behind, the unbearable tension of watching time run out. In the final act, as the chosen survivors board their vessel and the skies begin to burn, the film doesn't celebrate victory. It pauses. The world ends not with defiance or denial, but with terrible, dignified silence. And then a second chance appears on an alien horizon. When Worlds Collide still holds remarkable power today, it reminds us that the future is never guaranteed, and that even if we escape obliteration, we carry the burden of how we lived before it came. But as some looked to the stars for salvation, others were discovering that the greatest mysteries might lie not in the heavens above, but in the depths below. The visionary beneath the waves. The sea doesn't belong to despots. It belongs to all mankind. Before the atomic age redefined science fiction, one film dared to dive into the deep, not for monsters or metaphors, but for a visionary's rebellion. Captain Nemo didn't want to conquer the world. He wanted to escape it. But peace, built on pain, doesn't last forever. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea arrived in 1954, Disney's first major live-action production. It was a cinematic statement about power, freedom, and the profound limits of isolation. The film tells the story of Professor Pierre Aronnax, his assistant Conseil, and the harpooner Ned Land, who are sent to investigate a mysterious sea creature attacking vessels. What they discover is a sleek, silent submarine called the Nautilus, captained by the enigmatic and deeply haunted Nemo. James Mason's portrayal of Captain Nemo remains one of science fiction's most complex and compelling characters. He is brilliant, cultured, and profoundly broken. Having rejected a violent, imperialist world that has taken everything from him, Nemo uses science and genius to create isolation, to float beyond politics, above nations, beneath the notice of those he despises. But peace, purchased at such a price, doesn't bring contentment. His conscience and his carefully guarded secrets weigh heavier than the ocean itself. Kirk Douglas is magnetic as the restless, freedom-loving Ned Land, providing both comic relief and the voice of those who refuse to accept captivity. 20,000 Leagues doesn't rush toward destruction. It lingers in wonder. The lavish underwater photography, the award-winning art direction, and the unforgettable battle with a giant squid earned the film 2 Academy Awards. But beneath the spectacle lies a quiet, mournful warning. World is undeniably beautiful, but it is also unbearably lonely. He has conquered the sea, yet he cannot conquer his own bitterness or the ghosts that pursue him. When the Nautilus is ultimately scuttled and lost, taking Nemo with it into the depths, it's a requiem, a recognition that a man who tried to live entirely without the world cannot escape what that world made him. The film reminds us that isolation, no matter how justified, may soothe the troubled mind, but cannot heal the human heart. Only connections can do that. And sometimes, as we're about to discover, that connection requires confronting not the monsters we imagine, but the fear that blinds us to the truth standing right before our eyes. The aliens who wanted peace. They didn't want to cause distress to anybody, but we couldn't understand that. In a decade obsessed with invasion, one film dared to ask a harder question. What if the aliens weren't the enemy? What if they were just trying to get home, and we were the ones they feared? It came from outer space, arrived in 1953, and in doing so, quietly flipped the invasion narrative. Directed by Jack Arnold, and based on a treatment by the incomparable Ray Bradbury, the film stood apart. Instead of monsters bent on conquest, it offered something radical for its time: compassion for the unknown. Richard Carlson brings earnest intelligence to John Putnam, the amateur astronomer. Barbara Rush is Ellen Fields, his fiancée. The story begins with what appears to be a meteor crash in the Arizona desert. Putnam investigates and catches a glimpse of something otherworldly in the crater. But when he warns the townspeople, no one believes him. Have you ever tried to explain something you've witnessed to people who weren't there? That isolation. The film understands it perfectly. Slowly, familiar faces begin to act strangely. Has the invasion begun? But then comes the film's remarkable twist. The aliens have taken human form, not to conquer, but to survive. Their ship is damaged. They are stranded on a hostile world. Hostile because of our weapons, but because of our fear. Frightened and desperate to remain hidden from creatures whose first instinct toward the unfamiliar is violence. Their actions aren't hostile. They're cautious, shot in 3 dimensions. The film created alien imagery that was shimmering and unsettling, yet never grotesque. The real tension comes not from violence or spectacle, but from the creeping realization that your friend, your neighbor, might not be themselves. Yet unlike its contemporaries, it came from outer space, ends without battle or bloodshed. The aliens complete their repairs and leave peacefully. And the humans, at least some of them, are left with a new and humbling perspective. This isn't simply a story about extraterrestrial life. It's about the profound risk of seeing the unfamiliar as a threat before we've even attempted understanding. It's about mistrust, born not from facts, but from fear. It came from outer space, reminds us that first contact may test not our technology, but our character and our capacity for empathy. Sometimes the film whispers across 70 years, the most alien idea of all is peace. If these forgotten masterpieces have touched your heart, share this video with someone who remembers when science fiction asked big questions and meant something more than spectacle. When we dared to dream. The Earth is the cradle of mankind, but man cannot live in the cradle forever. Before Apollo, before the space race had even been conceived, before anyone truly believed humanity could leave Earth's embrace, there was a film that took science fiction seriously. It asked not what if, but how, and remarkably, it tried to answer with science, not fantasy. Destination Moon arrived in 1950 with quiet confidence and extraordinary ambition. Produced by George Pal, this wasn't a story about alien empires or cosmic warfare. It was about achievement, about what it would actually take, physically, politically, and emotionally, for human beings to leave our world and land on the moon. The story follows a group of American industrialists and scientists who undertake the monumental task of building the first manned rocket to the moon. They're pursuing exploration, driven partly by wonder and partly by the sobering realization that whoever reaches the moon first will hold unprecedented strategic advantage. It's a film built on optimism, certainly, but also on palpable tension. The stakes couldn't be higher, and failure wouldn't simply mean disappointment. What made Destination Moon genuinely groundbreaking for its time was its technical ambition and respect for scientific accuracy. The use of miniatures, technicolor photography, and realistic depictions of weightlessness were revolutionary for 1950. The film even featured an animated segment, charmingly narrated by Woody Woodpecker, designed to explain rocket propulsion to to audiences. When the astronauts finally reach the lunar surface, it's presented with appropriate awe. The moon is vast, barren, and eerily quiet. There are no hidden monsters waiting in craters, just magnificent, terrifying silence, and the ever-present risk that one miscalculation could strand them forever. The only villain is gravity itself. And here's something most people don't know. One moment in this film would be recreated almost exactly on July 20th, 1969. The way the astronauts move, the way they plant the flag, even the emotional restraint in their voices. NASA studied this film, and when Neil Armstrong finally took that first small step, proving the filmmakers knew something NASA hadn't fully figured out yet, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Destination Moon may not possess the psychological depth of science fiction films that would follow in later decades, but its sincerity remains its greatest strength. It was a call to dream forward, and in many profound ways, it predicted exactly what would happen nearly 2 decades later. But as we would soon discover, not every exploration leads to triumph. When mankind opened the door, we may be witnesses to a biblical prophecy coming true. The beasts will reign over the earth. It opens with silence, a child walking alone in the New Mexico desert, wide-eyed and speechless, clutching a broken doll. Nearby, something has torn a trailer to pieces. The bodies are gone. What follows isn't just a monster movie. It's a warning we're still ignoring 70 years later. Them arrived in 1954 as the first creature feature to truly understand what it was doing. Directed by Gordon Douglas, with remarkable restraint and intelligence, the film took the fears of the atomic age and magnified them into something visceral, crawling, and utterly unforgettable. Giant mutated ants. The film plays out like a detective thriller. James Whitmore is Sergeant Ben Peterson, the weary police officer who stumbles onto something he can't begin to explain. Edmund Gwenn brings unexpected gravity and scientific authority to Dr. Harold Medford, the elderly entomologist who understands exactly what humanity has unleashed. The horror is immediate and undeniable. These aren't just oversized insects. They're organized, intelligent, and reproducing at an alarming rate, shot in stark black and white, with shadows that seem to press in from all sides. Them carries the atmosphere of film noir. The creatures were born directly from nuclear testing in the New Mexico desert. The film never needs to shout its message. It's always there, hovering just beneath the surface, like radiation you can't see, but know is present. In the climax, the nest is discovered beneath the streets of Los Angeles. But the victory feels profoundly easy. Lives are lost. The city is scarred. And as one character warns with terrible prescience, when man entered the atomic age, he opened a door into a new world. What we'll eventually find in that new world, nobody can predict. Decades later, Them still feels urgent and unnervingly contemporary. Not because the threat of giant ants is real, but because the warning at its heart remains unheeded. We continue opening doors without fully understanding what waits on the other side. We develop technologies before we understand their consequences. The 1950s understood something we're still struggling to accept. Sometimes the monsters we should fear most are the ones we create ourselves. Through ambition, unchecked by wisdom. The door is still open. We're still walking through it. And we still don't know what's waiting. The final warning. 13 films, 13 warnings, from flying saucers to shrinking men, from imperiled planets to awakening horrors. These movies gave us something more valuable than entertainment. They gave us prophecies. The day the earth stood still told us fear makes us stupid. Forbidden Planet showed us the enemy lives inside our own minds. Invasion of the Body Snatchers warned that conformity destroys the soul. The Fly proved progress without ethics ends in tragedy. War of the Worlds humbled us by making bacteria our savior. The incredible shrinking man whispered that existence doesn't require acknowledgement. When worlds collide, asked who deserves to survive. These weren't predictions about the future. They were mirrors held up to a generation who had just learned they could destroy the world and were terrified by that knowledge. They asked, what will we become when we're frightened? When we meet something we don't understand? 70 years later, we've got different weapons, different fears, artificial intelligence instead of atomic energy, climate collapse instead of the Cold War. But the same question echoes through every frame of these films. When we finally meet something we don't understand, whether it's an algorithm, a virus, or just our neighbors who think differently, will we react with wisdom or fear? The 1950s knew the answer. They put it in every scene, every shadow, every warning, delivered through black and white film and Technicolor dreams. They just hoped that someday someone would finally listen. Are you listening? Thank you for taking this journey through cinema's most prophetic decade. If these stories moved you, a like helps others discover them. And if you'd like to explore more forgotten chapters of Hollywood history, subscribe. There are so many more stories waiting to be told. Until we meet again, keep watching the skies and keep asking the hard